warm welcome also to all of you. It's fantastic to see so many of you joining us for our session on the state of the industry. Also, as Katie mentioned, my name is Mariana Evanstein, and I'm really delighted to be back at the ITB for a second year in a row. And it's also so exciting to see some old faces and many new faces, so it's going to be a fantastic session. We are super fortunate to be joined today by leading experts in the travel research and advocacy fields. They're going to share their insights on the current state of travel, and in particular, we're going to be exploring key industry trends. Of course, we also have to look at what the challenges are, and we're also going to dive into two of the main forces shaping the future of the travel industry, namely sustainability and, of course, technological innovation. To set the stage for our conversation, we're going to begin with two short keynote presentations. We're going to hear some research, and we'll begin with Focusrite, which is a leading authority on travel technology and innovation. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker from Focusrite. She's the Senior Vice President of Content. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a very warm welcome for Mitra Sorrells. Mitra, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Well, hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here and to represent Focusrite, a brand of North Star Travel Group. My background, as some of you may know, is as a journalist, so I am going to start with some of our headlines. Travel remains healthy and is outpacing global GDP, but growth rates are slowing as we continue to normalize post-pandemic. For consumers, travel remains a core priority, and the intent to travel in the future is very strong. New technologies are creating an environment that is ripe for entrepreneurs, but funding remains hard to secure. Generative AI is permeating all parts of our lives, and in travel, the opportunity for transformation is huge. And as AI agents become integrated into everything we do, we will also need verifiable digital ID in order for them to take action on our behalf. So let's begin with what the market looks like from a size perspective with some data from our Focal Point database. This is showing the value in US dollars of gross bookings across air, hotel, car rental, cruise, package travel, and rail. 2023 was the year that we eclipsed pre-pandemic levels, and we have been continuing to grow since then, albeit at a slower rate, more normalized rate. By 2027, we predict that the global industry will be approaching $2 trillion in gross bookings. From a regional perspective, these are our estimates of share of bookings for this year. Asia is still below its pre-pandemic levels, as it was one of the first regions to open post-COVID. In the coming years, we expect to see most of the growth in markets in the Middle East and Latin America, and a slowdown in growth here in Europe and in North America. The Middle East and Latin America also have the highest percentage of gross bookings still taking place offline, but everywhere there continues to be an opportunity to shift to digital channels, and we believe that this will accelerate as generative AI tools become more mature and are able to actually handle very complex bookings. Some data points from our most recent European consumer research. The numbers of people traveling and the amount they are spending is trending up in recent years, in part due to an increase in the room rates and transportation costs, but the trip frequency is also up, averaging 3 to 4 trips per year. And despite ongoing geopolitical issues and concern about inflation, consumers continue to prioritize travel. When we ask how they prioritize their discretionary spending, travel rates the highest, ahead of categories such as fashion, entertainment, beauty, and health. And the majority of people who traveled in the last year intend to travel in the year ahead. When planning those trips, more and more travelers are turning to social media, particularly as digital natives become a larger part of our traveling population. For brands and destinations, that creates an incredible opportunity to use these platforms for marketing. But consumers are smart, and so brands have to be smarter to stand out. For European travelers, Facebook and Instagram are two of the most commonly used platforms for travel planning. And in our survey that we are doing this year, we're also asking about usage of Reddit and YouTube, because we know that for some of the younger generation, those are growing in popularity as ways to get travel tips and reviews. And in fact, in the US, YouTube is on par with Facebook and Instagram. Sustainability, such an important topic that is still such a challenge. We know from our research that consumers say they care about climate change and over-tourism, but many don't actually know what sustainable travel really means, and most don't see it as their personal responsibility, often because they feel they don't travel enough to make a difference. Here in Europe, our research found last year that when it comes to paying extra to support sustainable practices, generally travelers are willing to pay a premium for meals with locally sourced ingredients, as opposed to paying a premium for other things, such as eco-friendly lodging, flying on an airline that uses alternative fuels, or using local tour guides. Let's talk funding. Focusrite's Travel Startups Interactive Database tracks nearly 8,000 companies. Total funding to startups in 2024 came in at $5.7 billion, slightly ahead of 2023, but still far lower than many prior years. And the number of funding rounds was also the lowest in a decade. So the question is why? The slowdown in VC activity the last couple of years is not specific to travel. It is part of a macro trend that we are seeing. And it's similar with acquisitions, which peaked in 2022 and have since fallen sharply. But we anticipate that as inflation tames, as company valuations reset, and hopefully as interest rates continue to come down, we should see more capital coming into the travel investment ecosystem this year. And despite the relatively low total numbers last year, there were some very large funding rounds and acquisitions, as you can see from these headlines from FocusWire. Notice that most of these are European companies. This region has really been a hotbed for activity. But we need to keep in mind that in the coming years, travel startup investing may really transform as generative AI shifts the way companies operate and how much capital they need to do so. And one big question with generative AI is, of course, do consumers even want to use it for their travel? And if so, how? Our research shows that travel is a top use case for people using ChatGPT, Perplexity, and other such platforms. And while travelers 18 to 34 generally use generative AI the most frequently, it is those ages 35 to 54 that are the heaviest consistent users for travel use cases. And past users express interest in using it for travel in the future, which indicates that they have thus far been very happy with the results. But we know generative AI isn't perfect, and so do consumers. Top of their list for improvements as it relates to travel is better accuracy, followed by the ability to find deals, inclusion of live prices, and the ability to actually make bookings. And all of these things are getting better and closer every day. In fact, the most read recent story on FocusWire covering the debut of OpenAI's Operator Agent explained how the company has partnered with Booking.com and Priceline so that the AI agent can search and complete a booking. And as you can see from these other headlines, there are many other efforts to integrate generative AI across the industry, from hotels and airlines to OTAs and content sites. And there's no doubt that this is the year that AI agents become more common, more refined, and much more effective. And so at Focusrite, we are thinking about, and we encourage all of you to be thinking about, what this will mean for your company and for the industry when at least some of our customers are not human, when we have agents talking to agents to search and book travel. AI certainly can boost efficiency, for example, for customer service, but what does it mean for marketing and selling when agents are shopping on our behalf and when they don't really care how attractive a website is? And how can digital ID, which is on the verge of launching here in Europe, help to create the trust for agent-to-agent communication? Scan this QR code to learn about a series of online events that we will be holding to really dive into these topics of how agents are going to impact the industry. The first event is March 20th. And finally, I would like to invite all of you to join me and my Focusrite colleagues, as well as many esteemed speakers, for Focusrite Europe, June 10th to 12th in Barcelona. You can scan this QR code for more details and to register with a discount. Our theme is the new agents, and we will be really focusing on this new age of travel, the emergence of agents, and what it means for the industry, from airlines to hotels to OTAs and more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mitra, for that overview. Next up, we're going to be hearing some insights from Euromonitor International. And for that, I'm pleased to welcome the Senior Head of Travel and Tourism Research. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a very warm welcome for Carolyn Bremner. Carolyn, the stage is yours.
Hi there, it's fantastic to be back at ITB. I've been here for, well, at least it feels every single year over the past decade. It really is a joy to be in an all-female panel as well. It says a lot about the state of the industry today. So, beginning with the state of the industry, I'd like to focus on those opportunities for unlocking value creation that we know exists in travel and tourism, especially after Mitra's fantastic presentation there. So first of all, we'll look at the forecast outlook. How are we performing globally? We'll zero in on those top performing destinations, then look at some key travel trends, such as we've heard with AI, and then wrapping up for key takeaways. So when it comes to the forecast outlook, I mean, it really is fantastic to stand here and to say that we are breaking all records that we've ever seen before in travel and tourism. So we know that we all experienced the pandemic, we've come through the other side, and now we're smashing it. So we can see that the forecast for 2025 is an astounding $5.5 trillion worth. That's international and domestic tourism spending. Looking at the performance there, so 2024 was the year that we fully recovered, and now we're powering forward. What's really interesting from our travel forecast model, this is based on the baseline where we have Trump again in the White House, global GDP growth of 3.1%, inflation of 4.1% this year. We're expecting a forecast additional spending of $1.1 trillion over the next 5 years. That really is something to be focused and to be very proud of. That's all, based on the baseline. But yeah, if we continue with the leading destinations around the world, not surprisingly, we see the US. This is in terms of spending. We've got the US there at $156 billion worth of spending, followed by Spain. And you can see the clusters. So we've got Europe, a very advanced and mature region, generating a lot of spending in terms of those leading destinations from France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Turkey. Then over in the Middle East, they're really rising up the rankings. We've got Saudi Arabia, a very new destination, but really emerging, very luxury positioning and garnering a lot of attention. Along with the UAE, and then over in Asia, we have the North Asian destinations of China, Japan, and then of course Thailand, that's really sort of doing extremely well over in Southeast Asia. When it comes to those destinations that will enjoy the biggest increment over the next 5 years, not surprisingly, it is those leading destinations, but also we see the likes of India growing particularly strongly. We've got Hong Kong that's benefiting from that resurging Chinese outbound market. And so generally, when we see the growth coming in terms of spending, very much driven by Southeast Asia, North Asia, and then obviously some countries such as Spain in the UK. So not in the UK, in Europe. Then when it comes to the leading categories, this slide really sort of delights me because we talk about sustainable transformation in the industry. Our top performing category in terms of fastest growth over the next 5 years is rail. And that really speaks to that transition that we're seeing, the shift to more green and environmentally friendly transport. But also it's really interesting to see guided tours, attractions, all those in-destination experiences that we know travelers are so passionate about. And then towards the bottom of the top ranking list there, we've got food and dining, niche sectors such as medical tourism, and obviously spas and wellness also growing really well. So when it comes to the top trends to watch, I know that everybody in ITB will be talking not just about sustainability, but also that digital transformation. But these are the top 5 global trends that we have at Euromonitor for this year. So stepping out for those immersive local cultural experiences. And the more that you can align your brand and destination with travelers' values, their passions, and their interests, the more that they will dip their hands in their pocket and spend. And we see that coming through the data that we have. Obviously, we have Gen AI for not just personalization, it's hyper-personalization. It's on absolutely steroids for that connected and seamless trip. Always acting with intent for a positive impact at a local level. And hence we see the rise of regenerative tourism. Really delighted to see that that's taking a center stage at ITB this year. And obviously people-centric, community-based tourism projects and communities leading tourism agenda, having a voice at the table, all very much driven by this transformation that we're seeing to a sustainable and quality-driven tourism model. So, of course, we've talked a lot about AI already from Mitra. Here we're looking at businesses and how they're integrating AI over the past year compared to the next 5 years. It's really interesting to see the focus initially on marketing, on content generation, and it's shifting to the supply chain over the next 5 years. As we know, it's highly complex in the travel industry, but already almost half seeing that they've integrated into travel planning and shopping. When it comes to some consumer survey data, we can see that almost 42% of consumers are comfortable chatting to Siri or chatbots to book and sort of shop and buy travel. We have 30% of consumers comfortable with AI and brands tracking their emotions. 30% also willing and comfortable to drive in an autonomous vehicle. And what's really surprising is the 22% that would actually have an implanted chip underneath their skin so that they can be even more frictionless and seamless. And of course, we know that robots are already in the industry with self-service check-in and room service, so it's all becoming very normal. When it comes to the proliferation of AI across the customer journey, it's really important to be aware of those generational differences. So we do see the millennials and Gen Z, jumping in, using it for sort of enhanced assistance, for more personalized recommendations. But those baby boomers and the Generation X are lagging slightly. So we've got to make sure that there's not any kind of digital exclusion going on. And of course, just to focus a little bit more on Gen Z, now this figure here really surprised me. So almost a third of Gen Z still will go in and speak to a travel agent. Everybody's saying the travel agent is dead. Well, I would say the Gen Z definitely don't think so. We've got 67% of them who will spend more on wellness. They're very into their holistic well-being. And 51% who would spend an additional 30% or more on sustainable travel features. And I know there's the can-do gap. However, the data is very compelling. So I'd just like to summarize today's trends. We see this continued insatiable appetite for real cultural immersion. The more authentic it is and credible it is, the more people will pay for. And obviously it needs to be credible in an authentic way and measurable, which is so important. Passions-led, we all talked a lot about Taylor Swift, but when you do align with consumers' interests and they allow them to follow their bliss, that really does, they're really willing to spend more for that. Of course, we need to ensure we protect the biodiversity and the natural environment. And the more we move into this next generation of AI, the more personalized, the more contextual, but equally, hopefully, the more fulfilling for everybody. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the panel.
So thank you so much for that, Caroline. And you said it, we have an all-female panel, so I'm very excited to welcome back Mitra. You can just come and join us up on the stage. And our third panelist is Virginia Messina. She's the Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Communications at the World Travel and Tourism Council, better known as the WTTC. So ladies and gentlemen, let's have a very warm welcome for Virginia joining us on stage for the conversation. Right. So a lot of very interesting insights there. One of the things that I found kind of surprising, I believe, Mitra, it was in your presentation, you highlighted that we're seeing record-breaking travel spending, but we're also seeing slower rates of growth. So it does seem to be a bit of a paradox. And maybe, Virginia, if we can start with you. We haven't heard from you yet. What does this paradox mean for the travel industry and from the perspective of the WTTC?
Thank you, Mariana, and great to be here. So WTTC represents the private sector across the whole travel and tourism ecosystem. So for about 30 years, we've been monitoring the impact that our sector has across the economy, so across total GDP, including our direct and induced impact. So what we've seen, as you said, is unprecedented recovery. As we know, by the end of 2024, we were expecting all regions to have recovered their contribution of tourism to the economies, which was faster in some cases of what was originally predicted. I think we're kind of seeing that trend sort of stabilize, but what is true, and as our president and CEO said yesterday at the opening ceremony, travel is still booming. So I think what we still see is that path of growth. We monitor our growth over the next decade, and we know that travel and tourism will be growing above the global economy. And towards the end of 2034, we expect travel and tourism to be worth a staggering 16 trillion to the global economy, and be responsible for about 450 million jobs. So I think where we are is we've continued that. Obviously, some regions have gotten there a slightly different pace. Asia Pacific, as Mitra mentioned, has taken a bit longer to recover, and therefore it's getting there. And 2024 was definitely really strong for them too. So yeah.
All right, so good news that spending is strong. What other kinds of shifts have you observed in your research? Maybe Caroline or Mitra, you can talk to us whether you're seeing some changes in the types of trips that people are taking. I don't know if there's more premium experiences or people who are interested in doing longer trips instead of just a short trip. Are more people deciding to travel within their own country or region? What are some of the trends in those categories?
Well, at Euromonter International, we have traveler segmentation. So we have 8 different traveler tribes, from eco-adventurers to bleisure to luxury seekers. And what we do see is this greater diversification in the market beyond the traditional leisure seeker, which traditionally would be your sun and sea. And of course, that whole sort of shift to the passions and interest-based tourism that we were talking about means that they will pay more, and we are definitely seeing that premiumization in the market. Equally, we know that travel brands are kind of passing on the costs of the sustainable transformation to their consumers as well. So we see airlines, adding on green taxes such as Lufthansa. So this whole premiumization it's kind of necessary as well. But as Mitra outlined, we do see this really strong propensity to spend on travel. It's a top priority for consumers, and that puts us in a very good position going forward.
Yeah, I would simply echo a lot of what Caroline has said, and certainly we have seen as well in some of our research that just that whole in-destination experience is really what is driving a lot of the decision making. Whereas, not that long ago, it may have been, let's pick the destination and then I'll determine what I'm going to do there. Now, the what I'm going to do is really oftentimes the very first piece of that decision.
Now, Virginia, I know that the WTTC publishes a travel and tourism economic report. So what were the findings of this report? Does it correspond to what we just heard from Caroline and Mitra? Are people willing to spend more when it comes to offers that care about sustainability? Or are you also noticing some other trends?
I think sustainability is definitely still a trend, and actually our economic report, which I mentioned just briefly in terms of the impact to GDP and jobs, that we have now expanded that to look at our carbon footprint. So we knew as an industry we needed to understand where we stand. You can't manage what you don't measure. So what we did is develop this environmental and social research, where we now know that in 2023 our sector was responsible for about 6.5% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. There's some good and bad news there. I think what I would say is the good news is that carbon intensity is reducing. So that means that per every dollar spent in travel and tourism, we're producing less carbon, which is obviously good news. But the truth is the change needs to be much faster. So that's what we can see sort of at the macro level. Now, we've also tried to understand what's happening from the business perspective, because as we represent the top 200 businesses across the sector, and we developed a net zero roadmap, which we just sort of relaunched, or the second edition with our partners at Accenture. We just launched it at COP29 in Azerbaijan last November. And what that tells us is similar. About 50% of these 250 businesses have very clear climate targets. So we're making progress, but the reality is that progress needs to be much faster. So what we're doing is looking at the individual industries, but also what the low-hanging fruit is. Action needs to start now. So how do we tackle emissions now, and then obviously look at scope 1 and scope 2, and obviously then move on to our supply chain, which is a real challenge across the sector.
Well, you mentioned that we have to do more when it comes to sustainability, but it almost feels like in this economic climate, the enthusiasm, this momentum for sustainability does appear to be slowing. And this is even though I think it was in Euromonitor's research, Caroline, that Gen Z, for example, is willing to pay a premium for sustainable travel. How do you explain this disconnect?
Well, I mean, we've been, talking about sustainability for a long time in the travel industry, and what I'm seeing is this kind of sea change after the pandemic, especially when we have the WTTC, sharing data on the carbon footprint of the industry. It's so important that we have that transparency on the impacts. And consumers, they don't want to trash destinations. We know that over-tourism is back in the news, but, nobody goes out of their way to be, inhospitable when you go to somebody's, destination. So there is, and we see that coming through, from our research, from the Booking.com survey that they run every year, that consumers, they want to have a positive impact. They want to engage in a positive way with those local communities. And it's just, we just have to ensure that we are providing those environmentally friendly services that we know that they will enjoy and pay for.
Mitra, I'd like to ask you also if you can add something about Gen Z in particular. Their spending power is increasing. Is it a preference for sustainability that's going to be driving them and their choices in the kind of travel they book, or are there other things that are driving Gen Z?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think, we have to really start paying attention to this demographic, right? The oldest Gen Z are now approaching 30. They have a lot of spending power. They love to travel. So I think certainly we need to be looking at that closely. I think, from what we have seen from our consumer research, not just Gen Z, but overall, there seems to be a bit of a sentiment that the responsibility specifically related to sustainability and the cost of it should start more with suppliers and maybe regulation from government and not as much falling to the consumer, but that may be evolving over time. But specifically with your question about just some Gen Z trends, we just recently did some research in the US looking at short-term rentals and hotels, and we actually found that for Gen Z and some of the younger millennials who have stayed in both types of accommodation, there's a preference for hotels. So that is an interesting piece, and again, as they have more spending power, I think that's something to take a look at. They also seem to show a bit less propensity for traditional loyalty programs. And they certainly, of course, are using social media for almost everything. So that's an important place for brands to be.
I have a guess why Gen Z is more likely to choose to stay in a hotel. It's the ones who don't have children yet.
Well,
because maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, if you're, got your 2 kids in tow, you'd rather have the Airbnb. It's really interesting. Whether that will shift also as they become a bit older.
Yeah.
I do want to stay with Gen Z for a minute because something else that really surprised me, Caroline, your data showing that nearly a third of Gen Z book travel in store. I kind of feel that all of them are just using their phones and apps to do everything. What does that tell us? Is this some sort of resurgence of travel agents, or are people kind of sick of the non-personal channels for booking travel? What's going on there?
I think it speaks to just the sheer volume of information that's available, and that travel agents have premiumized, as we've seen over the past decade or 2 decades, to compete with online travel. And so they are seen as the experts, and they very much positioned themselves as such, as the personal care. And it's not just in terms of booking. We also see when it comes to recommendations and who you speak to, it's not necessarily your celebrities that you would go to for travel tips. It's your friends, it's your family, and it tends to still be in person. So it's, it's very, it's that chat that's really important that then inspires you and gives you that spark to go and then book online, obviously.
We have just a couple of minutes left, and we absolutely must talk about generative AI because that's going to be huge moving forward. And again, for the next generation, there's going to be people born now who don't know a world without generative AI and what that's going to look like. Virginia, I'm curious maybe to hear from you how you believe AI is going to transform the travel industry. I know people talk about it as being key for efficiency, but is it going to do more than just make things more efficient?
Absolutely. I think AI is definitely the front runner, and we're already seeing some real sort of changes and transformations across the whole ecosystem, whether it's internal operational efficiencies, whether it's obviously personalization, customers, but even from a sustainability perspective, we know how AI is now helping the airlines tackle contrails, for example, which is a real challenge for many decades. So that is certain. Now, but there are so many other technologies as well. So I'm really pleased actually that here at ITB we're going to be launching our latest report called Technology Game Changers. And so we're looking at about 16 different technologies across 4 trends. So digital technologies, obviously including AI, but then we also look at travel and mobility technologies. We look at financial technologies, and we look at breakthrough innovations like space tourism and quantum computing. So all of these are obviously impacting our day-to-day lives, but will definitely change the world we travel, we choose to travel, and how we control our data, all the different preferences you're saying that can now be sort of managed through a super app, and you can just immediately watch a Netflix documentary and then book your trip to that latest destination immediately then. So it is going really fast, and I would say our sector is one that adapts really quickly, but we need to also up our game when it comes to adapting to all these new technologies.
Mitra, what about what your findings tell you about the role of AI moving forward in the travel industry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is just how kind of overwhelming it is to keep up with everything and the pace of what's happening. So I think if there's others in the audience that feel the same way, you know, I think we're all in this together as we try to keep up with the updates that are coming out. But yes, certainly we really see it as just transformative in so many ways. That series of online events that I mentioned, that's really, we're going to be looking to dive in on a few key areas. First, starting with the impact on operations. That seems to be sort of the low-hanging fruit, and we're starting to hear about companies using it to expedite things internally. Then we are also looking at the impact on distribution. You know, what happens, again, when we potentially have agents buying from agents, and what happens to the way travel is bought and sold. We're looking at marketing. What happens when we have GEO, not SEO, you know, generative engine optimization, and how can brands adapt to that? And then we're also looking at the impact on the in-destination experience. You know, you potentially have, whether it's glasses that you're wearing and you walk around and it's kind of, that's your tour guide for you, or autonomous vehicles that you step into and they take you around a location. So I think it's really going to be something that's going to change almost everything.
Caroline, from your point of view?
Also, if we think about those consumers, we've got a new generation called the beta babies, so Generation Beta. They're those kids that are born this year and will be up until 2039. I was looking at our Euromonitor demographic data, and so by 2040, there will be 2 billion Generation Betas, and you know, some of them haven't even been, well, a lot of them haven't been born yet, and they're going to be Gen AI native. You know, they're going to be AI first. We really have to be prepared for them.
And just in one sentence, as we wrap up our session, if we want to look to the future of the travel industry, what are the key things to look out for then for the success of this industry?
Oh my gosh. I come back, I'll jump in. I come back to just what's happening with AI, and I would say just jump in and try things and test and learn, and you know, that's the best way to move ahead.
Mm-hmm. I like to see it personal, but also human. So the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Virginia?
I think it's the importance of partnerships as well. You know, how we work together, how it's the public, the private sector, now the communities. We all need to really come together and look at those challenges ahead. And really, it's only together that we're going to be able to, crack it.
So stay courageous, keep it human, and work together. I think that's a really great way to end the session. Ladies, thank you so very much. Some fantastic insights, this all-female panel. Really appreciate it. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.